Welcome to H-Frame, the only comprehensive, totally unofficial guide to vintage Black & Decker Workmates. The website is hframe with a hyphen .weebly.com, where you'll find my in-depth documentation, over 60 web pages, over 100 PDF documents, over 500 photographs, and still growing. Subject of this video is the Workmate 79001 Type 2, which was the second Workmate made in North America for the United States and Canadian markets. The 79001 Type 2 had a long production run, the longest of all the 79001s, from May 1975 to June 21st, 1977. It is also by a wide margin the most commonly found 79001 today, making up roughly 45% of the 79001s out there. That's almost half of all of them are Type 2s. The next most common is the Type 4, accounting for, again, roughly 20% of 79001s. So together, the Type 2 and the Type 4 make up about 2/3 of all of the 79001s. In this video, I will make references to features and components of both the Type 1 that preceded the Type 2 and the Type 4 that followed it. So you may find it helpful to watch the videos about those types as well to understand the comparisons more completely. So if you have a 79001 with no type marking, how can you identify it as a Type 2? You do it by the combination of three components: the aluminum H-frames, the jaws with 9 peg holes in each one, not 10, and the rear jaw pivot nuts that the vice screw threads into, made out of aluminum rather than plastic. A Workmate that has all three of these is a Type 2. When the 79001 Type 2 debuted in May 1975, it was extremely similar to the Type 1 with only a few changes. Most of these involved the vice jaws. The label on the top of the jaw stayed mostly the same, except that the type number was added to it. The type number was also stamped in ink on the bottom surface of the jaw, which I'll show you in a moment. If you recall, the Type 1 was not marked with its type number anywhere. The number of peg holes in each jaw was reduced from 10 to 9 by eliminating the center hole along the edge where the jaws meet. That was right here. On the Type 1, there was a 10th hole right in this location. At the ends of the jaws, there were 2 holes, one in each corner, this one, and this hole you see right here was out at the corner instead of where you see it now. So that original hole arrangement for the Type 2 is what I refer to as the 9-hole 4-corner pattern. I don't have one of those Type 2s anymore, so I can't show it to you, but you can see photos at my website. About 9 months later, the hole pattern changed again when they moved these outermost holes into this location. So this Workmate here has what I call the 9-hole zigzag pattern, because the holes form a consistent zigzag all the way from one end of the jaw to the other one. The peg holes were increased in diameter from the 3/4 inch holes on the Type 1 to the 20 millimeter holes that have been standard for all Workmates ever since then. Of course, the posts on the pegs also increased in diameter. I can show you that here. Notice how this peg here, which is from a Type 1, just drops into this hole very easily and it wiggles around. That has the 3/4 inch post on it, the smaller one. The correct 20 millimeter one for this Workmate and all the others is this one. And you can see it takes some effort to get it in, and then it does not wiggle very much at all once it's in the hole there. The Type 1 had 2 vertical V grooves in each jaw for clamping tubular objects vertically between the jaws. These are placed so that 2 opposing grooves form a diamond-shaped opening. On the Type 2, one of these grooves on each jaw was eliminated. So now the opening, as you see it here on the Type 2, is triangular and half the size of what it was on the Type 1. With the Workmate flipped over, you can see the ink stamp on the bottom of the jaws showing the type number. You can also see the Brockville production code that tells us the date when the Workmate was made. On the Type 1, this code was 4 digits long. About a month into production of the Type 2, they added a 5th digit to the code to indicate the work shift when it was made. The code of 64461 on this particular Workmate means it was made in 1976, week 44, day 6 of that week in the first factory work shift that day. This works out to Saturday, October 30th, 1976. This date is a rarity because out of over 600 Workmates that I have found with Brockville codes, only 10 were made on a Saturday. I haven't found any made on a Sunday, and the rest are spread out fairly evenly across the 5 weekdays. In addition, only 30 of those 600 plus were made during the first shift, as this one was. You can read more about the Brockville production codes at my website. The 4 jaw mounting brackets changed from solid aluminum blocks on the Type 1 to this steel U bracket attached from below with wood screws. This eliminated the need for the threaded inserts in extra holes near the ends of the top of each jaw on the Type 1. Those holes are no longer present on the Type 2. You would be seeing them in this view of the top here. On the Type 1, there were screws securing the top ends of the side stays. This is the end of the side stay here. On the Type 1, there were screws securing that into the slot in the upper frame piece. Screws were eliminated on the Type 2 in favor of this permanently attached male keyhole connector. Eliminating the screw simplified factory assembly, but required the addition of a keyhole, which you can see right here, at the end of what had previously been a simple straight slot. So the revised slot now turns upward at its rear end slightly and terminates in a keyhole where the side stay gets inserted during assembly in the factory. The Type 1 had a wonderful, in my opinion, domed cap at the pivot point of the top latch here. Unfortunately, on the Type 2, that cap was replaced by this simple flat disc. And I think the Workmate lost a little bit of style when that happened. So that covers the changes made at the introduction of the Type 2. Changes in the Type 2 continued soon after its introduction and appeared at a rapid pace. Type 2s vary far more in their components than any other type. Depending on how you count, there were up to 14 changes in the Type 2 during production. The earliest Type 2s are the heaviest of all the 7901s, weighing even more than the later types that have steel H-frames. However, the changes during the 2-year production run reduced the weight of the later Type 2s by about 3.5 pounds, took about 10% of the weight off of them. Right near the beginning of production in June 1975, an odd thing happened. There was 1 week of production where many Type 2s reverted to using the upper frame pieces from the Type 1. These would be the pieces I showed you with the plain straight slot with no keyhole and the side strut that attached with a screw instead of the keyhole connector. It would appear that perhaps they did this to use up some old parts they had left over from making Type 1s. In July 1975, this was not a component change, but production of the Type 2 was interrupted due to temporary layoffs at the Brockville factory. In September 1975, production of the Type 2 resumed, but the finish on the legs and lower frame was changed from the shiny plating on the Type 1 to gray paint. This was the first use of paint on a 79001. At the same time, these little plastic pieces right here attached to the bottom of the upper frame, these soft gray plastic, were added. I call them scratch guards because I believe they were intended to avoid damage to the paint on the lower frame when the Workmate was folded. They were never mentioned in any written material from Black & Decker, not even on the part diagrams, so I suspect they may have been for protection during shipping. They fall off pretty easily, so they are often missing. In October of 1975, the conical rubber foot pads from the Type 1 were replaced with these short cylindrical ones. These are all one piece. The pad is all one piece, no longer using the glued in inserts that tend to break off on the Type 1. In February 1976, the holes in the jaws changed, as I described earlier, creating the 9-hole zigzag pattern that was used for all of the following 7901s that were manufactured in Canada. The Irish imports that were badged as the 7901 Type 3 and Type 5 continued to use the 10-hole jaws. June 23rd, 1976, the aluminum core in the center of the plastic vise handles was changed to plastic. In October 1976, this was not a change in the Workmate itself, but the style of the swivel pegs changed. The posts were shortened, and the tabs at the end of the post were moved to the sides instead of the front and back. I don't have any of those posts or those pegs to show right now, but you can see a photo of them at my website. October 28th, 1976, the front step or footrest decreased in width from the original 7 inches to about 6 inches, now with only 3 ribs instead of the original 4. With those changes, this brings us up to date on this particular Type 2, which was produced on October 30th, 1976. I don't have a later Type 2 to show you, so I'll just describe the later changes to you. Those changes continued on the Type 4, so you'll be able to see those features in my video for the Type 4. In November 1976, the scratch guards were discontinued. February 11th, 1977, the remaining unpainted steel parts, that would be the side stays, the upper brackets, the U brackets, the top release levers, were all painted gray, matching the lower frame. At the same time, the metal bushings at the pivot point of the H frame, you see that bushing right in the center of the screen here, were changed to a white nylon. I suspect that was to protect the newly painted gray frame that it would be bearing against. March 1977, the vice handle and arm that you see here was replaced by an entirely plastic assembly. The aluminum arm became a plastic arm. The knob, which here has a center core of plastic, the new knob was simply hollow. At the same time, the vice screw was lengthened. This is the shorter one here. Was lengthened in preparation for increasing the maximum jaw opening. The longer one would have extended out just past that screw at the pivot point of the H frame. At this point, on the Type 2, the guide slot in the upper frame piece was still short, and that's the part that restricts the opening. So even though it had a longer vice screw, the jaws would still only open 4 inches. In March, there was also a sort of incidental change. It was when veneered MDF was used for the jaws for the first time on some Workmates. They really didn't switch to it entirely. They went back and forth between using MDF and plywood for quite some time. In May of 1977, the inner spring steel catch for the folding legs, that's the one that holds the legs closed, changed shape. Instead of the original half circle, it has a couple of slight bends in it, somewhat similar to the outer catch. This made it less susceptible to damage. Finally, in June of 1977, in the last week of production of the Type 2, the guide slot that I showed you here in the upper frame was lengthened. So there are a few Type 2s where the jaws will open to 5.5 inches. Type 2s from about March 18th, 1977 forward are extremely similar to the first Type 4s, which started production 3 months later on June 21st, 1977. You have to look closely to tell these two models apart. So that is it for my introduction to the Black & Decker Workmate 79001 Type 2. Please visit my website for even more information and come back and see my other videos. Thank you.